All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is our Fair Trade Philadelphia September event. And if you aren't familiar with what we do here, we're a local fair trade volunteer-based organization. And we work to basically cultivate a more fair and equitable and honest economy throughout Philadelphia in a variety of ways through educating and uniting consumers, enterprises, and institutions. And we do that through events, films, field trips, guest speakers, and a variety of other things. And today we have the pleasure of showcasing a virtual screening of the documentary Voice of Vanilla and engaging in a talk with the producer, Maureen Lee Maloney. So Maureen was a Peace Corps volunteer in Madagascar, and now she does documentary filmmaking. So Maureen, if you'd like to share a little bit about yourself and the film before anything you'd like to say, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, sure thing. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. Like she mentioned, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Madagascar, and now am a documentary filmmaker, and I work as a camera operator in reality television. And so I knew I wanted to tell a story about Madagascar. I wanted to really bring Madagascar to the US, because when I came back from my service, I realized people don't know very much about Madagascar at all. And when I was there, I was really struck by how climate change is affecting people's everyday reality now, and it has been for a while. And Madagascar really gets left out of the news. There's so much that happens there, and we'd never ever hear about it. And I think, a lot more attention is being paid to, if we're going to support these countries around the world that are being affected so much by climate change, then we need to understand what's happening there. And more attention is coming to the fact that we need to listen to women's voices, because they are carrying the burden, especially of a lot of what's going on. And so I knew I wanted to tell a story related to the women there and climate change. And I knew people who were in the vanilla industry, and that seemed like a really perfect combination of, this is an industry that employs a lot of women. It's highly impacted by climate change and many other factors. It's almost like a little microcosm of issues that the world is facing. And at the same time, it's really connected to us in the United States and people all over the world, because everyone loves vanilla, right? And so it kind of seemed like the perfect story. I was able, through the Peace Corps, to connect with some great filmmakers. So Gail Borgia, who's directing the film, and a variety of other Malagasy filmmakers, my DP, Jiaofeno Hopper, and my associate producer, Samson Kayed, who are the team on the ground there in Madagascar, kind of making this film happen. So what we're going to be witnessing right now is a shorter version of the film. Ultimately, we want to create a feature-length film that we can make available through a wider distribution, theatrical distribution, and PBS. But we also want to create a short version like this one for educational purposes, conferences, and things like that. And so what we'll be watching now is an early creation of this shorter film that we can use for educational purposes to start conversations around fair trade and climate change, and how women are being impacted.
Okay, great. Wonderful. I see some clap emojis. So we're so grateful for Maureen to be here with us today and to share the film with us. And I think Becca is going to kick things off the talk with a few questions that we had after a few of us watch the film in advance, and then we can open it up for Q&A at the end from others as well.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Maureen. That was really cool to kind of get a glimpse into the day-to-day life of a vanilla farmer in Madagascar. So yeah, we did have some questions prepared for you. It is kind of funny because this documentary actually relates back to a presentation we had here at Fair Trade Philadelphia a few years ago from the co-founder of Burlap and Barrel, which is like a direct trade spice company. And he spoke to us a little bit about the process of vanilla farming and how labor intensive it is. Mm-hmm. And he actually mentioned that vanilla has to be hand pollinated in Madagascar. And I was wondering if you had any like extra insight to share into that process and how that can be, especially for like a single female in Madagascar trying to oversee these crops that have to be hand pollinated.
Yeah. Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, and I assume you mean Ethan from Burlap and Barrel. So, Ethan and I definitely connected. Especially early on, I was doing a lot of research, talking to people generally in the spice industry, but also people who worked in coffee and chocolate, and kind of similar products. And yeah, so we actually have footage with Juby, with this farmer from back in 2019 of her pollinating. So one of the things I wanted to show here is to get a sense of just how far she has to go to get to her vanilla plot. So it's about an hour and a half walk to get there. It's a very, very long walk. And it does, the flowers do have to be pollinated by hand, which is it's a very like specific process of, you have to lift up one part of the flower and press the other part together. So and of course they get very good at it, doing it a lot, but because each flower only blooms for one day, and not even a day. The flower blooms first thing in the morning. If it's not pollinated by noon, the flower will just die and fall off, and you don't get a chance. And this happens over the course of a couple of months. So the farmers have to go back to their plot every day during this bloom period, because all of the flowers don't bloom at the same time. One flower blooms, a few flowers bloom this day, a few flowers bloom the next day, a few more flowers bloom. So they have to go every day and scour their plots looking for the flowers. They have to do this before noon, and then they have to hand pollinate each one. So it is a process, and so it's very tedious and time consuming, but it isn't necessarily you don't have to be strong. And so this is what makes it very, doable for women, especially older women like Juby, because they don't have to be strong to do that. On the occasions when they do need somebody, like a guy to help them with something, they can hire a guy. But that can get expensive too. And then once the beans have grown, then that's when it becomes more dangerous, because the plots have to be protected by thieves. And so then someone like Juby has to then hire men to help her guard the plot.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how long does it usually take for a vanilla plant to grow from a seed?
Yeah, so one of the things that you can see in this video is Juby taking vine cuttings and replanting them. And mm-hmm. So that's typically what they'll do. They'll replant from vine cuttings. It takes about 3 to 4 years to regrow it to the point where the vines are producing beans, or producing flowers and then producing beans from the flowers. So yeah, typically 3 to 4 years before the vine will start to flower. And then once you've pollinated the flower, it's about 6 to 9 months before the beans have grown to the point where you can harvest them.
Wow, incredible. So then that obviously shows why I'm sure many of these farmers have to have some kind of secondary crop or secondary form of income in that growth period.
Yeah, and most of them, like Juby, grow rice because, as you saw, that's the bulk of their diet. It's like a giant plate of rice. And so what happens if, like, for instance, this year, there were 3 huge cyclones that really wiped out the rice crops. So she has to go and buy rice. And right now, rice is very expensive. So it's a whole, but there's, and also the storms, the cyclones tend to destroy a lot of the other natural food, like bananas, jackfruit, breadfruit, all the stuff that's growing naturally that people can otherwise just go and harvest on their own. But now there's less of that, and so they have to buy food from the market.
Right. Wow. And I guess kind of relating back to the prices of different goods increasing or decreasing, I noticed that Juby spoke to the price of vanilla decreasing, and I just kind of wonder why that may be. Is it because there are like a lot of substitutes on the market now, or some other factors involved?
So this is one of the most frustrating things to see. The price of vanilla has always been extremely volatile. And from what I can gather, and the reason for this is the large companies that control vanilla and control the vanilla prices. And speaking to people in like coffee and chocolate and those kinds of commodities, it's the same thing in those markets. And so what these companies do, and one company in particular in Europe, not only controls a large portion of the vanilla market, but they also manufacture artificial vanilla. So they also control a large portion of the artificial vanilla market. They're controlling the prices. So they will drive the price down, buy up a lot of the vanilla, stockpile it, and then they'll drive the prices back up. Right. What that does for the farmers not only creates a lot of instability, but when the price is really, really high, because it's never just like a normal price, right? The vanilla is really, really valuable when it's valuable. And that, in a place like Madagascar, makes the vanilla really dangerous. That's when people are getting killed over vanilla.
Wow. Yeah, I know. I feel like we all needed a moment to take that in, because that's just wild to think about. Because I'm sure also, like, no one's getting a heads up that, hey, you might want to start protecting your crops because like the value's spiking. Yeah, wow. Okay. Let me just check my notes for some of the other questions. We did have some questions about how the 2017 cyclones wiped out a lot of crops. So when that happens, we saw in the video how Juby used cuttings to create new plants. But when crops are completely wiped out, how does a farmer like restart that process? Do they have to buy seeds from like local sellers, or?
Yeah. And
yeah.
Fortunately, it's rare that like all of somebody's vanilla is lost. It's usually, most of it, like in 2017, a lot of it was lost. Usually people are left with a few vines, and so they can make cuttings from that. When they do lose everything, there are other farmers in the area usually that have cuttings that they can buy from, or they will have to go to the market and purchase cuttings there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. I feel like we've covered a lot of the questions that we had in here. The one last question pre-open Q&A session we wanted to ask was, are there any like new developments since you actually filmed?
Yeah, so we started filming it in 2019. Of course, COVID was a huge new development. Specifically with vanilla, last year, the government, so the global price of vanilla dropped drastically. And in that case, farmers everywhere get screwed over when the price is really, really low. The government of Madagascar created a policy. They created a price floor. Basically, they wouldn't sell less than, I believe it's $250 a pound of vanilla, which is a lot more. I believe the price this year is around $100 a pound. So it's a lot more than the global price, which if businesses were willing to come in and say, okay, well, we need this vanilla, we're willing to pay this price, that's fine, but that isn't how it works. The buyers simply just don't buy the vanilla from the farmers. And then what is happening, and this is legitimate businesses, legitimate farmers. What then ends up happening is illegitimate businesses that have some kind of protection, up high protection, say connections within the government, they will take their vanilla and they will sell it illegally for lower prices. So legitimate businesses are getting shut out. Businesses like LaFaza that I have mentioned to Rachel that do specifically fair trade vanilla from Madagascar, they're really left in the lurch. And then, these illegitimate businesses with sketchy practices that are not fair trade and things like that, they then have the opportunity to take advantage of the market.
Right.
And that's happened 2 years now. So they did it last year. They did it again this year. The farmers protested, but they have very, very little power, really no power. So no influence in the government.
Right. Just curious, and then I promise we'll get to the open Q&A. Have you been in contact with any government representatives in Madagascar about this?
That is a good question. I have not. So
Okay.
Initially, and this is one thing, initially this was just going to be a film showing the lives of the farmers to get an understanding of what it is like, what their needs might be, things like that. So with these new developments, there is the question up in the air of, do we start really addressing this? And if we do that, then obviously our security concerns go a lot higher. I have to worry about my team, and we have to get a lot more support to do that. So we're we're weighing that at the moment. Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay. So if anyone has any questions for Maureen, I have one in the chat, so I can go ahead and read that. And if you want to read or say your question out loud, you can just raise your hand or do the little raise hand emoji, and we'll get to you as well. So Rachel says, does the government subsidize growers' costs at all to help stabilize the market? I didn't see the main woman's male companion working that I could tell. Is he also a vanilla farmer? What does he do to protect their crops? And then does he work? Do the children work too?
Mm-hmm. So in this instance, so that man was Juby's boyfriend. He is not a vanilla farmer, and he doesn't really contribute to Juby's livelihood, from what I understand at all. I don't think that they have any children. Another one of the farmers that we've been following, Sani, she has a young child who's much too young to work, even if she could. I'm sure there are probably kids that are working in some vanilla fields. I haven't come across any in any of like the villages that I've gone to. The government does not subsidize the growers at all. There are nonprofits and this is some of the other controversy that's been happening in the country, particularly during COVID, because a lot of the foreign NGOs were kept out of the country. And so funds were going, there was a famine in the south of Madagascar last year, which our director, Gail, actually reported on. And there wasn't any oversight as to what was happening to those funds, and they were not ending up supporting the people in the way they were meant to. This year with the cyclones, it was a little bit better because there were some NGOs able to come in, and specifically they gave out rations of rice to people. But even that is very, very limited, and it's limited to specific areas.
Go ahead, Patty.
Yeah.
I see you.
I had a couple of questions. One, I know that the government used to have a program where they helped farmers that were affected by climate change. I know that disappeared over a couple of years, but I'm wondering if it's back, A, and B, with the Peace Corps, are you helping them with like planting beneficial plants and things that could help with the insect problems?
That is a really good question. So the Peace Corps was gone during COVID, and they've only just restarted. I'm actually not even sure if there are Peace Corps volunteers back in Madagascar now. And I think they lost a lot of government funding. So in recent years, the Peace Corps has been limited to areas very close to the capital. The Vanilla region is one of those places that doesn't have a road to it. It's a fly site. You have to take a plane to get out there. And so most of the time, the Peace Corps doesn't have the funds to have volunteers out there, unfortunately. They used to. There was a while where they had more funding, but in recent years, they haven't had the funding for that. And the insect problem is fairly recent. These are insects that have moved north as the climate has changed, from my understanding. So the insects are a fairly new problem. And I don't know about the government program. I haven't heard about a government program to support the farmers. So I assume that hasn't been reintroduced, but I can definitely look into that. I'd be curious actually to know what that program used to be and how it operated. But since 2009, there was a coup, and there was a presidential coup. The president at that time was overthrown, and this new president has had a lot of controversy and hasn't been as supportive as the old. So I'm guessing that program was under the old president, Ravalomanana, but I'd have to look into that.
All right. And then Rachel had some more questions. Let's see. I know there have been illegal Chinese fishing boats along the Madagascar coast, including in protected reefs. Are there any issues with other foreign countries invading for the vanilla?
I haven't heard anything about countries. I mean, I do know that export of vanilla to China has increased a lot in recent years. It didn't used to be a major, China didn't used to import very much vanilla, but it has become much more popular there in recent years. But I haven't heard about any countries invading for it specifically.
Mm-hmm. And then how does the Fair Trade Association help or support with this entire situation?
Yeah.
I don't know, sorry. I don't know, Rachel, have you had any experience working with businesses that might source vanilla also?
No, I actually not through the Fair Trade Federation. I know we mentioned Burlap and Barrel at the start, which I know sources spices from around the world, but one of the places being vanilla from Madagascar. And then Maureen mentioned La Faza. Is that the correct name of the organization too? So that was actually going to be my next question, as well as, I think you had mentioned that it was started by another Peace Corps volunteer, correct? And is a fair trade organization that is sourcing vanilla from Madagascar from these farmers. So anything you know about that and how, how they've been affected, you mentioned, by the price fluctuations, and then also, which I'm sure, wanting to pay people fair wages and that sort of thing. They've probably, unlike other companies, maybe trying to be more stable with that, but then with the certain, minimums, how that can affect them too.
Yeah. I mean, they're lucky to be working in a very unique community that has cultivated a variety of not just food crops, but also like commodities that can be sold, like cloves. So all of these, the sugar, the vanilla, the cloves, these were crops that were introduced originally by the French. And Madagascar was kind of used to grow these things for France. And they did this in other places too. In the Comoros, I know they used the Comoros to grow ylang ylang while they were there. So it's like an interesting history, and they were very specific and very regimented in how they allowed people to grow. So in certain areas, you were only allowed to grow vanilla. In other areas, you were only allowed to grow clove. And to this day, there is a lot of taboo around growing clove in this area or growing vanilla in this area, because the way the French would punish people if they caught people growing the wrong crops. And so they work in this really unique area where people have been growing cloves and vanilla and a variety of other things that they can both eat and sell. And so that community has been able to be more resilient. But because La Faza itself focuses really on vanilla, they, I actually haven't had the chance to speak with them recently. They may even be considering expanding, I'm not sure. But with their focus on vanilla and the price of the vanilla being so high, and I'm sure like everyone in the Fair Trade Federation can understand that you're already kind of dealing with higher prices, and so you're trying to compete with them with the artificial vanillas and the lower price commodities in your specific markets, that having those higher prices is unfortunately not really feasible. So
yeah, for sure. We have a question in the chat from Andrew. Are there local farmer corporations or organizations that may bring farmers together to maximize both their labor, productivity, marketing, and profitability? Or are there any government policies against such organizations?
Yeah, there aren't, and there aren't gut policies against it. And some people have attempted this. There's a couple of problems. As you can tell from the film, these farmers are extremely busy. They work sun up to sundown, and they're not very well connected. They're scattered through the rainforest. So if they were to connect with other farmers, they would have to do that in one of the main centers like Sambava, which is several hours, an expensive taxi bus ride. I think it just really isn't feasible for these farmers to be connected. And even if they could overcome those things, then there's the problems of who leads it, and how do you give power, and what kind of power do you give to those people. And there also isn't really the trust of level for that among people to do that. So there's a lot of, it would be helpful. And actually one thing that some fair trade companies have done is they've tried to create cooperatives, but then you have the situation where these cooperatives, these companies come in, they create a cooperative, they work with these farmers, they'll agree to a price for vanilla for this year, but then they're undermined by the larger companies that have been known to send in people to, say, promise a higher rate that they'll buy the vanilla for. So then the farmers will want to go and buy from these other people. That essentially kind of breaks apart that cooperative agreement. And then those people won't come through with the price that they agreed on. But they've created enough confusion that it's difficult to go back to the agreement, and a lot of these efforts to create cooperatives just get undermined intentionally.
I have a question. So in looking at the cocoa industry, chocolate is obviously one of the main things that I know we talk about in our organization and just in the fair trade realm in general, that is pretty easy to locate when you go into the grocery store. It says right on the label, fair trade chocolate or fair trade cocoa. And there's even a documentary out there about like the cocoa industry and, the child labor that's involved. And there's this very clear divide between these massive corporations, like I think Nestle, I forget what the other ones are, that are very clearly not practicing ethical, fair trade methods of getting their cocoa. And so I have a very clear understanding of sort of those two sides of what is fair trade and what is not. But with the vanilla industry, is it the same thing that you have these massive corporations or big companies versus the small farmers, or is it not so black and white?
Yeah, so my understanding is mostly that it's a very similar situation to cocoa and coffee, that yes, you have these large companies, and like I said, that send in people to undermine the cooperatives that smaller fair trade companies are trying to establish and things like that. And so that these efforts and these larger companies are also creating this volatility within the system. But then they go in and they have, they set up schools, or they set up health clinics, you know what I mean? They'll give out free rice. And it's like, well, what people would rather have is that stability, so they can buy their own rice, so they can, have, their own clinics, their own schools and things like that. But, they do this charity work to make themselves look good. But that ultimately just creates an unstable system.
So, I guess for someone like all of us who live in the United States, presumably, I think everybody here does, I'm always sort of looking for what's the solution? Like, how can we help? What can we do? Is there anything that we can do? Because I don't mean to be cynical, but it's kind of sounds like we're up against a pretty difficult situation here. If these companies have such a manipulative power,
yeah,
and they're able to manipulate people into thinking that they're there to help them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I like I'm sorry to say that there isn't like a simple solution, that it is a very complicated problem. And so that's part of why what the goal of this film is, not to present an easy solution, but to help people understand. Because I think even just, what is the situation with these farmers? What are their lives like? And what kind of help do they need? What can be done to make the situation? There's so much that's lost in translation, or just simply unknown, partly because Madagascar is such a remote place. Where do you start? How do you understand the situation? And so this film is meant to help start people thinking and talking about it, and get a little bit of more understanding. What are their lives like? Okay, so then, like, what might be useful? Because, for instance, somebody coming in and trying to set up a cooperative, that it's totally understandable that somebody would think that would be useful, but then at the end of the day, it's not. And so, okay, well, so this isn't, so maybe like, let's try to work through what could be, let's connect with these farmers, and start to take the baby steps that are going to be needed ultimately to make improvements gradually over time.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, because the fair trade movement, it definitely, like, I would say the average person, if you go on the street, they don't even know what that means. And so sometimes some of these issues, they take time. And first is that part of just educating people. I've never heard about this before, so this is all new to me, and I thought that I knew most of the issues going on within this realm. But so it's really kind of humbling to realize that there's so much happening that I had no idea about. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can echo what Julie is saying. I feel like vanilla is kind of a new topic of conversation, since we have had such a focus on coffee and chocolate in the fair trade world for so long. So I am also very thankful for you for bringing this to us and to others. And I'm just kind of curious about your actual, like, the process of filming this. Like, did you hit any roadblocks? And also future goals for what you want this documentary to kind of move forward into.
Yeah, I mean, documentary filmmaking is quite the process. It's even without things like COVID or a famine, or it's a difficult process that takes many years. And it is a process of grant writing, getting a little bit of funding, go out and filming, using that footage to grant write a little bit more, go out and film some more. So, rotate like that. We plan to be filming in 2020, and of course that didn't happen. And then even beyond that into 2021, with the situations in the country where Madagascar never really got vaccines. I mean, they got a small amount of vaccines for a handful of people. For a country of 21 million, I think they're at right now, they did not get a fraction of the vaccine for people there. And then, the government was actively working against that. So, and then with, people being blocked out of the country, a lot of the country's income is from tourism. And so, people were really just left in a bad situation there. And that made it more and more difficult to go and film, to keep my team safe, and so on and so forth. So we were really glad to finally be able to film. And even, I mean, early this year, January, February, March, they were hit by 4 major storms in the Northeast region, in the Vanilla region. So there's been things like that. Those have been our major roadblocks. But we're still plugging away, baby steps, little by little, following the farmers as much as we can. One of our farmers has already given up on vanilla. And that, that's an important thing to note. Juby mentions in this version, people are afraid to even continue planting the vanilla because maybe the prices go down and they're not worth it. But that, as you can probably tell, the farmers are so used to that volatility. They're ready to pivot to something else when they have to. Juby is turned her house into a bar, it's pretty crazy. It's incredible what she accomplishes. But for the future, we're going to continue following these farmers. The plan is to create a feature-length film that we can get wider distribution, PBS distribution, and just raise as much awareness through all different avenues. So organizations like Fair Trade Federation, but also botanic gardens, museums. There's so many places that screen films now that to reach all kinds of audiences that will be going through organizations like that as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure I can speak for all of us, and we'd love to keep in touch and keep following your journey, keep sharing your work.
Yeah.
And then I know we're almost at time. We have 2 quick questions in the chat, and then I think we'll call it after that. So Karen asked, of all the vanilla grown and certified fair trade, what % that is actually sold via fair trade terms with the minimum price and premium? So what percentage of vanilla is sold with fair trade terms?
Yeah. I actually have no idea, but that is a really good question. Yeah. And even, beyond that, I think to add in there, to look in the percentages of the amount of vanilla sold, the amount that's fair trade, but also the amount that is artificial, comparing that to the amount of artificial, because I can tell you, and this is talking about the volatility of the price of vanilla, the worldwide supply of vanilla never even comes close to the demand for vanilla. Never comes close to the demand for vanilla. It just can't. It's too difficult. You can't grow it in more expensive, in places where it would be more expensive to grow. You're so limited with manpower, having to hand pollinate and do all of that. And so really the price of vanilla should never drop if you think about supply and demand. And one thing for the last year, the price of vanilla to have dropped so drastically is just crazy, because in 2020, the demand for vanilla skyrocketed as people were at home baking, comfort food, and more people want real vanilla. And so it's just, how is the price dropping? People are using artificial vanilla, but that has always just made up the difference, but it never makes up the difference so much that the demand for real vanilla drops. It just doesn't.
And could I add one thing there too? So yeah, it's interesting to see that the companies that we've learned about and worked with, like Burlap and Barrel, and then now learning about La Faza, I think both of them are doing like more direct trade and aren't, I think, officially certified or verified by another organization. I think, though, I have I've seen certified spices at like Whole Foods and things like that. I'm sure you all have too. I'll have to look out and see if there is certified vanilla too. And I think that would probably either be by Fair Trade USA or possibly Fair for Life, something like that. So that could be something that we follow up on as well, and see what's out there.
That would be really interesting.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay. Rachel asked, can anyone financially support Juby? Would she be able to receive money? How would that work?
That is a really good question. And yeah, I've actually been trying to think about like how we would do this. I mean, there is, you know, she doesn't have a bank account. we definitely can't like Venmo stuff to her. But there, like, obviously we could do like a specific fundraiser for her type of thing. And this is like something I've been talking to other documentary filmmakers who've done similar things about like how do we best support the people who are in the film, because Juby, it's not just Juby, we do have other farmers too, and they all could really use some support, and they all will get a portion of the film should the film make a profit. But I'm working with other documentary filmmakers to figure out the best way to do like fundraisers and get some funding for the farmers, but also to not create problems for the farmers, especially while we're filming, because that can be another situation where we draw unwanted attention to those people who are being filmed.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and then we'll read Karen's question. Oh wait, or is this just a statement? For coffee and cocoa grown and certified fair trade, about 29% of this is sold on fair trade terms. For fair trade tea, only 4% of this is sold via fair trade terms. Interesting. So yeah, it would be really fascinating to kind of figure out how the numbers for vanilla match up to those statistics. Okay. And then Rachel wanted to follow up really quick. I'm just thinking of how little of any American's money could help her in a huge way. Like, what do they survive on? A few dollars a day. But yes, not to put her in danger is best. Absolutely.
I think Patty had a question too.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. Oh, I think you're muted.
Okay. My question was, how big is the village that she lives in? Could the women themselves make a cooperative and have the group sort of supported so each person didn't have to walk an hour and a half each way each day?
That is a good question. The village is pretty small. I would guess probably around 1,000 people in the village. I'm not sure how many vanilla farmers there are.
Are they afraid to let other farmers know where their crops are? Is that the issue?
Some of the farmers are, yeah. So another one of the women that we've filmed in the same area, Sani, she thinks that her vanilla crop was poisoned this past year, and so she has moved her vanilla crop to a secret location. she's kind of like spreading it out, and so I know one farmer at least that definitely has that concern. Juby hasn't mentioned it, but her plot, as I said, is pretty far out there, so maybe that's why she doesn't worry about it, because some of the farmers are closer to the village and some are farther away. But that's a good question. I don't know.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for today.
Yeah, and keep us updated too about if there are, as you're kind of going along, and if you do figure out ways to fundraise. But I also totally understand the issues around that too, maybe just wanting to educate and kind of report on what's going on too. But there's other ways we can help. And I mentioned earlier too that you can donate towards the film, so that's probably another way. And we also put in the chat the link for La Faza, where you can purchase some vanilla there too. So a few little things we can do in the meantime, and then hopefully we can keep in touch and keep hearing about, you know, ways we can support and new developments as time goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, and I put in my my email address and the website for the film. I do have an email list that I send out monthly to quarterly. I don't send out emails very often because I myself hate getting newsletter emails, but but I do try to keep people updated on what's happening. And the farmers are, I should mention, the farmers are compensated for their time, that their film, their talent, you know, so and so they are at least getting a little extra support, and you know, for now through those means. So yeah,
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maureen. This has
Mhm.
been lovely. Thank you to everyone for showing up tonight.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, we'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Wonderful.
It was really a wonderful program today, and thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate
Thank you,
you.
Maureen.